of that, and I think I might buy the next updated one just because my shitty notes from like my undergrad study when I was like a moron, I like poetry, like I just don't want to look at those ever again. So I'll just
It's embarrassing, you know.
yeah. So they'll have a marked up version and then like a clean
I still
version.
have them all though. But I do
Same,
have
yeah.
separate copies of like Sabrina Ora Mark's Sim Sum. I have a separate copy of
Dude, we
Bridget
should.
P. and Kelly's The Orchard
Oh,
too.
dude, we should do Kelly's The Orchard on an
It's a
episode,
great
dude.
book.
Yeah, I mean,
God, she died not long ago
I
too.
know. So did Bloom, dude. I mean, right before the pandemic here,
Yeah, but she
Bloom.
was young. Like I mean,
Yeah,
she
that's
was
true.
younger.
Much, much
She was
younger.
like 60, 61, wasn't
I
she?
was gonna say, I think she was like even younger than that.
Yeah. So
Like,
that was a bummer. Was looking forward to that book. I mean, like whatever she was eventually going to put out next, but she historically takes a long time to write.
yeah, and she was another one that was just so serious, just so
So
serious.
original.
Yeah,
Just so starkly fucking original. It was insane and it would just eat away at your soul.
right. Like I think if people, I mean, that inspired me. Like, I mean, my first book isn't out yet. I mean, I've been hawking it to fucking presses and contests and shit, but it's the way. I mean, that inspired me deeply. I think reading that book, even years later, I still think of the sheep stands dumb by the fence. The sheep stands dumb. Like, and I
It's
just
great.
yeah, I think of that over and over again. Like, it just pops into my head randomly, and I'm just like, oh,
Sheep
what?
Child. Great
Yeah,
poem.
yeah. And I'm just like,
Go read it.
whoa.
Yeah, the whole book is fucking phenomenal.
Heavily influenced my collection that I've been trying to hawk here, but I hope to be my first book. All right, well, let's talk about the actual. I guess why people, if anybody actually came to listen to this, what they would listen for. Bloom. I'm just gonna read a brief off his Wikipedia because it's less convoluted.
Yeah.
So Harold Bloom was he was born on July 11th, 1930, and he died again recently, October 14th, 2019. I remember it was a sad day when that happened, dude. I mean, I remember social media especially kind of going, well, everybody's mixed just because he was such like a famous critic. So if you're that big, I mean, you're gonna have a lot of hate and a lot of love at the same time. But so people were throwing that around. But I think most of what I saw when he died was positive. Like people, as most cases when people die, like it's all positive. Nobody's gonna talk about the ugly shit, or
Well, yeah, I mean,
some
he
people will.
was
But yeah,
my sister, you know, I don't remember how it came up, but I like asked her something about Harold Bloom and about him being controversial, and she was kind of like, "Well, isn't he controversial?" And I was like, "Is he?" And then I discovered why. I mean, I get it.
anybody
Whatever.
anybody who has opinions is going to be controversial. So anybody that has a deep set opinion and argues that opinion
And like he
fiercely,
reads, I mean, well, he also does. Nonetheless, it is really difficult. I think you would be hard pressed to deny his intellect.
yeah. But
Dude
anyway,
was fucking smart.
like I said, when he died, I think it was there were some few outliers. They were like, "Oh fuck Harold Bloom," I'm glad he's dead. Like I mean, with the internet and social media, everybody can say whatever they want. So of course, there's going to be people saying that. But I think for the most part, especially the serious literary stuff that you and I pay attention to, like I saw mostly good. Like people were like appreciated that this guy, and you'll hear me and Sophie talk about it too as we get into this. Like this fucking what Bloom. He was so serious, and so fucking ugly,
But
dude.
what
I'm
he
looking at his
had the
picture.
right to be,
Yeah,
right? He
yeah.
like had earned the right. Like I hate it when someone talks really seriously about poetry, but they're saying actual bullshit.
Oh, I mean, if we're gonna get into
Like
that,
I
dude, I mean
just
that's most
want it to
scholarship.
be this easy. A poem needs to be a pile of dirt, you know?
Well, I have a
It's
few
beautiful.
questions I want
It's
to ask
fucking beautiful.
you. Hopefully, by the time we get to the end of this essay, I wanted to ask you like some follow up stuff, and I think That'd be a good place to bring in that stuff about Kale and maybe some of the Wendler stuff to compare if we wanted to, or like I wanted to bring in Auden because since you and I are both Auden fans,
Yeah.
like Auden's ideas of poetry conflict with Bloom's, I think, to some, and he never really talks about Auden. I think Bloom's relatively dismissive of Auden, although I haven't read a lot of stuff about what he's written on him. But yeah, I think that could be interesting.
I
Anyway,
would
let's
have to even
what?
like I would have to go back to um fuck. I'd have to go back to I didn't even think to look at Auden. I thought about
Well,
pulling his, selected down.
nothing. I'm not going to be getting into anything specific about it, but I just wrote down in the notes here just about how his idea of like what poetry does, as Bloom tries
Oh,
to give this whole essay to explain what,
okay.
and Auden very simply would just be like, well, poetry does nothing, like versus
But
this
he does
elaborate.
does he say poetry does nothing or does he say poetry does nothing? It is a mouth.
Well, that's the direct line, but I just mean the idea of like, Bloom's idea of it expanding consciousness is what poetry does. And like, well, the contrast to that, be like, well, does it? I mean, odd and be like, it's just there. It just is, right? All right. Well, I'll
Yeah.
finish the introduction and
Yeah,
then we'll
yeah.
get into this. All right. So Bloom was an American literary critic and Sterling Professor of Humanities at Yale. Uh, he was described, apparently in 2017, as probably the most famous literary critic in the English-speaking world. That's probably very true. And then he had his first book came out in 1959, of which he wrote more than 50 books over his lifetime. 40 of those are criticism. I think he did write one novel, although I've never heard of it or bothered to look at it or read it, although I might be interested now. And then, of course, he edited hundreds of anthologies. I mean, this guy, talk about writing introductions and shit like that to, Penguin Classics. I mean, this guy was the literary critic for decades. That said, his books have been translated into more than 40 languages. And the very controversial thing about him is that, yeah, he is a defender of the Western canon, however arbitrary that shit is to people. Uh, did you just send me something?
Yeah, just in the chat, just keep going.
Uh,
We'll talk
yeah.
about it later.
Education, if people care about this shit. Obviously, he got his PhD at Yale, and then got his BA at Cornell, at Cambridge as well. He got some, I don't know what the fuck degree he got there. But anyway, that's enough about his personal life. So I'm going to X out of this stupid Wikipedia. And that's Bloom. That's what it is. Just a little background. And yeah, I mean, it was this. I like the day he died. God, the guy's so ugly, dude. Like, I just look at this.